Thank you very much for taking the time to be here this morning, and welcome to the next one in our series of What Works, What Doesn't, and Why Insights from Evaluation. And today, as the posters and the communications say, today we will be discussing recent evaluation of the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation, or CAREC, as we all know it. Again, I think most of you would know that the ADB Charter mandates, and in fact, it gives very high priority to supporting regional cooperation and integration in Asia and the Pacific. The bank has helped to finance and facilitate various RCI initiatives. And on behalf of IED, the information that I can give you is the fact that IED has been systematically evaluating the three most notable of these initiatives, the GMS, the Greater Mekong Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation Program, and now the CAREC, that is the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation. The next one will be the South Asia Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation, that is the SASEC program. So today's discussion will be around the key findings and recommendations of the CAREC program. The CAREC subregion is one of the least integrated in the world, with the more difficult preconditions for RCI than any other developing regions. And it also has huge potential. So we will look at some of the key findings and recommendations, and for that I'd like to invite the team leader of the evaluation, Hao Chi, to come and make a brief presentation that will bring out the key highlights and provide us a backdrop for the discussion that's to follow. Hao Chi.
Thank you, Saliha. Good morning. It's my pleasure to quickly run through these key findings of the evaluation of ADB support to the CAREC program. The program is a partnership of regional cooperation and integration, comprising 11 member countries in Central Asia and the surrounding regions. ADB has been the leading supporter of this program. The program aims to promote regional connectivity, competitiveness, and regional public goods that address shared social and environmental risks and vulnerabilities. ADB support included the approval of 16 billion in investment projects and 163 million TA for the program during the evaluation period. About 73% of the investment financing was for transport, 23% for energy, and the remaining mainly for trade facilitation. TA grants were more evenly distributed across sectors. The decline in 2020 and 2021 coincides with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The evaluation finds that the ADB made a significant progress in promoting connectivity. The program exceeded its transport output targets. ADB financed about 47% of priority road segments. ADB's transport investment was about 80% of that provided by our development partners. ADB supported increased travel quality and speeds and traffic volume on the CAREC corridors. The percentage of roads in good condition exceeded target of 70% and reached 75 to 85% each year. The growth of the CAREC's intra-regional non-fuel trade indicates that the cross-border flows of goods and services likely increased. Energy physical connectivity increased and will continue to increase as ongoing projects are completed. This will increase the possibility for improving energy exports and imports. ADB support has contributed modestly to improving regional competitiveness, which is not a surprise, given the challenging scale of the issues in this area. ADB support boosted the infrastructure efficiency and accessibility and the economic development in key adjacent regions and districts, but no evidence of significant wider impact. No results were achieved in critical non-infrastructure areas, such as border regimes, trade regulations, and value chain development. Border crossing remain a major bottleneck, and trade barriers have increased rather than decreased, Regional competitiveness only saw a modest improvement. ADB support for regional public goods is still nascent, and only limited progress has been achieved so far. ADB support has contributed to promoting clean energy technologies across countries. Otherwise, ADB support for regional public goods is still mainly limited to strategy development and scoping studies. Results achievement will depend on continued institution and consensus building, and on availability of sufficient staff and tier resources. Results have been partly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as mentioned above. The current institution setup and strategy are generally appropriate. Stakeholders are satisfied with the decision-making structure, the meetings, and the strategies. Government counterparts value CAREC as a non-treaty grouping that is based on non-binding solutions and focused on economic development and investments. ADB resources on CAREC could be under increased pressure as the program expands into new sectors. ADB support could have been more effective by strengthening coordination with development partners, as well as by improving resource monitoring. The evaluation makes the following recommendations. First, strengthen regional level support for investment climate reforms, focusing on private sector development in the non-commodity industries. Second, increase support for modernization of customs, using an integrated approach, combining infrastructure, technical, and capacity building elements. Third, give high priority to developing a multimodal corridor network by increasing support for railways and aviation. Fourth, use the CAREC platform to support climate change mitigation and adaptation in all sectors through regional cooperation. Fifth, and lastly, strengthen the resource monitoring, including outcome measurement, data collection, and resource reporting. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hauchi. And just to let everybody know that Hauchi will be around, although he'll not be on the stage, he'll be here to answer any questions you might have of him. Now, a quick video. This has come about at the request of the resident missions, whose voices we want to hear on these panel discussions that we have called What Works. So we call it From the Front Lines. Let's have a quick look at this video to see what our resident missions have to say on this report.
Thank you very much for providing the opportunity to provide some feedback on this very important and useful report, which I would like to commend IED for. Clearly, all 5 recommendations under this report are quite important and useful, but I would like to focus on recommendation 4, which talks about using CAREC to actively support climate change mitigation and adaptation in all sectors. With ADB ambitions becoming Asia's climate finance bank and Paris alignment, these issues are becoming quite important. And from that perspective, one of the key development constraints, I think, facing the region, which requires perhaps a greater elaboration, is water security and impact of climate change on water availability for the countries in the region. This is clearly something that requires immediate discussion and support among all member countries of CAREC, so I encourage the bank to provide a closer attention and contribute more to this work in the region.
I agree with IED's recommendation to increase support for modernization of border crossing points and customs processes. The regional improvement of border services project supported establishment of national single window, joint customs control, and regional improvement of border facilities, and are steps in the right direction to loosen trade bottlenecks and ease the movement of goods and services. The project provides a suitable model of an integrated and holistic approach combining infrastructural, technical, and capacity building elements. Such model can be scaled up to more countries in the CAREC subregion, covering more border crossing points. Future modernization support could revisit existing border crossing points to better incorporate digital innovations and green and safe trade. Investments and technical assistance for the software aspect of the border crossing points and trade facilitation are just as important as those related to physical infrastructure.
Tajikistan, being a landlocked country, is a strong advocate of regional cooperation and is one of the most active participants in CAREC's energy, transport, and trade facilitation activities. At the end of December 2021, the total CAREC investments in Tajikistan amounted to 2.3 billion, of which 1.1 billion was financed by ADB in the transport, energy, and trade sectors. IED's recent evaluation on CAREC highlighted that ADB has not yet provided substantive support on investment climate reforms to promote economic diversification. I would like to point out that in case of Tajikistan, ADB has provided several budget support financings to improve the investment climate and business environment since 2015. One of strategic objectives of Tajikistan's national development strategy until 2030 is to turn Tajikistan into a transit country. I'm sure CAREC's program contribution on this development path will remain crucial.
Evaluation of ADB support for CAREC activities is timely and highlights key recommendations which are consistent with Uzbekistan's priority and its economic development path. Using CAREC as a platform to foster consultations and have a common approach among developing member countries, including Uzbekistan, would benefit half of Uzbekistan's population who are dependent on the availability of water in agricultural activities. Water resources as a regional public good is critical to govern and have a common approach to mitigate and adapt to climate change in Uzbekistan.
And a quick introduction to a very esteemed list of panelists that we have today. We have Executive Director Rachel Thompson with us today. Cyn-Young Park, Director, Regional Cooperation and Integration and Trade Division, Regional Cooperation, Integration and Trade Division, and Lyaziza Sabyrova, Regional Head, Regional Cooperation and Integration Unit at CWRD. I'd like to welcome all of you on the stage one by one, and of course, as always, what works, what doesn't, and why will be moderated by DG IED Manny Jimenez.
Thank you very much, Saleha, and thank you to this distinguished panel for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us from the field as well as those here in the K-Hub at the ADB headquarters. I think that you've all heard how important regional cooperation integration is for the ADB agenda. In fact, at the last annual meetings, President Massa commented on it specifically, and I believe the one ADB's quoted that he said regional cooperation remains crucial amid uncertainties geopolitically and the climate change issues that are confronting the world. So very pleased to have the perspectives of different parts of the ADB to reflect on this important issue, inspired by the IED evaluation. And for this panel, we're really looking ahead to see what might be the actions that ADB can take to improve on this strategic agenda. Let me start with you, Lyaziza, specifically. You are in the front line, so to speak, in CWRD, and you heard what the report mentioned about the big to-do list for ADB. And can I just ask you, as head of regional cooperation integration for the region, what you think the priorities are moving ahead?
Thank you very much, Manny, and many thanks to IED team. Indeed, it was very good, constructive process. We found the evaluation report very interesting, substantive, and in the process, we had very good discussions. We learned ourselves a lot also during this process. So many thanks, and I'm really pleased to be here. And I just wanted also to mention, I'm here representing CWRD, but of course, behind myself, there is a team of people working in my division, in CAREC Secretariat, and also you saw just a few resident mission staff, but we have 10 countries. We have in CWRD, we have 11 countries, 11 resident missions in CAREC program, so it's really a collaborative effort. So you asked us to reply in 3 minutes. I don't know if it will make a justice to our.
You'll have more time afterwards.
Okay, I'll try. I'll talk very, very fast. So the 3 recommendations that you mentioned in Huchi's report, in the report itself, on competitiveness, trade, on modernization of border crossing points, and on measurements, results measurements, they are extremely important. This is something what we also deal in CAREC on a daily basis. On the trade and trade facilitation and competitiveness, of course, it's a huge agenda in front of us. We have among 11 CAREC countries, 8 of them, they are landlocked countries. You can imagine, right? You can picture the map, 8 landlocked countries, and one of them is actually double landlocked country, one of the very few in the world. I think there are only 3 countries in the world which are double landlocked. So Uzbekistan has the pleasure of being the double landlocked. So, I mean, it's quite obvious. It's a common sense. Trade, smoothness, facilitation, competitiveness is extremely important, because all we want to do is to bring CAREC countries closer to global markets, to improve access, and to really strengthen the integration process. So what do we do on that? On trade, competitiveness, of course, you probably have heard, we have CAREC integrated trade agenda. We call it CETA 2030. There are lots of activities behind that. I think I see their faces. Teya, Zulfiya, this whole team, more people work on that. We try also to push for PBLs in the competitiveness area. Actually, I was just looking at the video, and I remember Sona, many years back when we were in CWRD, you were working on a competitiveness project in Kyrgyz Republic. We are also trying to bring more policy dialogue and more PBLs in that sense. We also support countries to access, the remaining countries in CAREC region to access WTO. We do it under CAREC program. That is Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And there are lots of, it's a huge agenda working on various aspects on e-commerce. So we are also trying to bring private sector to work with us. We have Digital Standards Initiative, which is, by the way, is a truly one ADB thing where we bring PSOD colleagues, OGC, of course, 2 regional departments involved in CAREC program and so on. And also we are trying to help countries to apply international standards in trade, various UN model laws like UNCENTRAL and so on. So it's a huge agenda on that. On modernization of border crossing, this is really very close to our core agenda and also to our hearts. I'll just maybe share with you, if you allow myself, in the past, I was based in resident mission many years back in Kyrgyz Republic, and myself, I'm from Kazakhstan. So I was crossing that border crossing point, Bishkek, Almaty, many times, and I experienced, you know, the difficulties, challenges. So we're doing a lot. We have this RIPS, Regional Improvement of Border Crossing Services, Almaty, Bishkek, and many others, Mongolia, PRC, our colleagues from transport, I don't know if Oleg is here, they are instrumental in really pursuing, yeah, Hideki-san, you've been leading this work before. And so it's a big agenda there, and now we are not just improving infrastructure, we are really trying to do it in a smart way. We have this big plan. I may mention it now. I don't know if my transport colleagues will be happy about that, but we are really working on one border crossing point in Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Georgia, which is the joint border crossing point. So that means that it's just one word, but what in reality it means is that businesses, people will not be crossing twice the facilities on the Azerbaijan side, on Georgian side, but only once, and all the clearances procedures will be done. So you can imagine the time savings, the easiness of people. So that's what we want for businesses to be smooth and so on. But this is a plan. We really hope we will get to that. But we already have Mongolia PRC joint border crossing point. And lastly, on results framework, I mean, obviously it's hellishly difficult thing ever to do any results framework for any, ADB project, to do it meaningfully. Now you multiply it by many times because it's a regional activities that we do involving 2 or more countries, right? So here I'd like really to mention here something we are very proud of. It's called CPMM, CAREC projects, CPMM, CAREC projects monitoring and measurement, and this is measuring the time it takes to cross different borders, freight, passengers, time, cost. So it's a huge database, not without deficiencies, shortcomings. We're improving, working on the methodology and so on, but it's a really good database which is being used now by many analysts working in this area, in economists, and we actually are working with BRCD colleagues to help to improve methodology of that. And also we have ARCHI, the Asia Pacific Regional Integration Index. We have our own CRI, we call it CRI, CRII, CAREC Regional Integration Index, which shows, and we saw that in the video, that CAREC is the least integrated sub-regional arrangements. So on measurement and monitoring, we really want to work with other analytical minds in our bank on really how to get better picture, because if we cannot measure it, we cannot monitor it.
Thanks very much, Lyaziza. First of all, thank you for your kind words to the team, and I think the team also felt they had very good interactions in preparing the report. Secondly, I think you note the work that you've been doing on competitiveness, modernization of border crossings, and the results frameworks, which are really key areas going forward. But by the way, I myself also personally benefited from the work on the border crossing, because I was hiking from Tajikistan to Uzbekistan 8 years ago, and I can only remember how difficult it was, and I've heard that it's now much easier. ED Rachel, let me turn to you. You heard about the priorities that the region is embarking on. You have a very distinct perspective, because you have, in fact, a couple of roles. One is, of course, is as ED to look at the whole region, because you have 2 of the countries in your constituency, but you also have a more all ADB-wide perspective as a board member. Can you reflect on some of the priorities that were mentioned, and also RCI itself as a topic of interest to the bank?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Manny, for the question and for the opportunity to join you today. And I want to start by saying I think this evaluation is incredibly timely. I think, as Lyaziza well knows, we have a number of CPSs in CWRD countries coming forward over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, including Georgia and Azerbaijan in my constituency. And I think the insights that the evaluation provides into greater regional cooperation could yield better economic and social outcomes, I think is incredibly valuable for us as a board to have, both in terms of helping us calibrate where we should be placing priority, but also I think importantly moderating our expectations about what is actually feasible over a 3 or 4 year time horizon. This piece of self-evaluation, I'm not always the most patient of people, and I think certainly one of the things that I think this evaluation really helps is demonstrating that even over a period as long as a decade, change can be incremental. And I think One of the things I also really appreciated about your report is that you validated CAREC as a really great example of ADB's convening power in action. It's something we often sort of talk about, but I think the report does an excellent job of sort of spelling that out. And in that context, I think it was really important that you highlighted the value that we bring as an honest broker. I think it's easy to forget in sort of the media maelstrom about sort of MDB evolution and the like, that the part of the value that we as a multilateral entity provide is the ability to create and hold space for dialogue that either otherwise may not happen or that may be really hard to sustain in the vicissitudes of changing bilateral and regional dynamics. I think that's, to your point, Lyaziza, I think that can be really hard to demonstrate in a results framework, but also I think the evaluation does, I think, validate that is a really important part of the value that we as an institution are providing to this part of the region. But I think we do need to recognise that our ability to act as an honest broker has to be grounded in our credentials as a relevant, responsive and effective development partner, and the commitment that we've shown over many years. Because, again, I think it's important for a board that changes over not infrequently to be reminded that trusted relationships take time to build. And while you may see sort of different faces on level 9 every couple of years, our member clients, I think, really evaluate their relationship with ADB over a much longer time horizon. So in that sense, I don't think it's so surprising that even after a decade of engagement through CAREC, there are still some areas where cooperation is relatively nascent or that we're only now really starting to see the full benefit of. I think you were right, though, to point out that, CAREC could lean into issues like trade barriers and bottlenecks that are an impediment to more dynamic trade and investment flows. Those flows, of course, are also going to become increasingly important in the context of members seeking to respond to a changing climate. I think it's another great example of where, reforms or changes that should make sense anyway become more important in a world affected by climate change. I think, as a number of the resident mission speakers in the video highlighted too, transboundary water resource management issues in the region are just critically important and absolutely an area in which, I think, we want to see ADB continuing to play a forward-leaning role. But I think that brings us to an issue that I think if as ADB we're really going to truly embed the solutions shift, we're going to have to grapple with, and that's kind of how we approach programming at a regional level. So it strikes me that a lot of what we do gets joined up on an ex-post basis, so we can point to a number of things we've done in individual members and craft an ex-post story about how it's regionally significant. Also often useful translation of lessons from one member to another, and Manny, as you know, I'm an out and proud member of learning culture as an important part of how we can differentiate ourselves as a development partner. But that's kind of different to taking an ex ante approach to thinking about what is the coordinated regional action that is needed to really grapple with either regional problems or the provision of regional public goods. And of course, part of why that's so challenging is that we're a bank and we lend to individual clients. So how we projectize, if that's a word, is kind of important. So getting one client to see value in borrowing from us is challenging enough. Getting a whole bunch of clients to do that in a very coordinated fashion and then stay the course is a whole nother degree of difficulty. So, I don't hear me sort of saying that I think it's easy or that I necessarily have answers, but I think as a board, I think this is something that I think we want to see management and staff grappling with, and would also kind of, and I think it's sort of imperative on us to also be evincing a degree of openness to the kind of innovative solutions or modalities that might be needed to really step forward in this space. Thanks.
No, thanks very much, Rachel. I think especially for highlighting the role of ADB as an honest broker, and it's not just about the monies, which I think I hear you saying, which is really important. And the other is the importance of learning and taking those lessons. So I want to turn to you, Cyn-Young. Especially, you've been living, breathing regional cooperation and integration through a lot of your career here at the ADB, and now especially as director for this topic in CCSD. And I wonder if you could reflect on that role from a more broader regional perspective, especially, after hearing Rachel and Lyaziza talk about how important learning is about regional integration, and also this very difficult question of our business model, whether it's geared towards addressing regional public goods, which, as how she mentioned, is one of the challenges in this topic. So, Cyn-Young?
Thank you, Manny, and then also thanks a lot for hosting this event. It's actually provide a wonderful opportunity for all of us learning a little bit better of how the evaluation actually provides as lessons for the RCI programs in Asia Pacific, not just the CAREC. Both Lyaziza and then Rachel touched upon very important and then insightful issues. Well, where I stand, actually, really a lot of issues are kind of complex and then interconnected. But in terms of let's say maybe the regional program or projects. What do we actually call regional projects programs? And I think that has a bearing on the regional public goods. For many, it seems that the regional projects are projects that cover multiple countries. Anything that covers more than one country. But for at least us who's doing some analytical work or provides at least the corporate sort of guidance for what the regional program is about, is actually referring this to the regional program as a program with multiple countries, but not just the number of countries that are in. It is the program that that creates the spillover, the cross-border spillover effects. So the idea really is based on a sum of individual projects or individual countries projects. Creates something bigger than a simple aggregation. And that's also precisely the definitions of, kind of public goods. That's why it is hard to, whether it is national, regional or global. I actually feel that that kind of a boundary is a bit arbitrary, with the exception of national, because this a sovereignty issue, and then there's a global because it covers all. Regional, the boundary could be quite arbitrary, but nevertheless, the public good in nature is really about the common challenges and opportunities. It actually is breathing on the spillovers and externalities. So where these externalities exist, it is very difficult for any individual country to take up capture the full sort of externalities in the project. That's why we always have a shortage of the public goods when it's left to just kind of a single individual project or single individual country. And I do believe that the ADB as multilateral multilateral development bank, a multilateral institution, has a naturally important role to fill this gap because there are areas where there's the collective action could generate much bigger gains, either economically or even fighting these regional public bets like climate change or having the health security in the region. And I do agree that there has to be a modality to allow this a design and implementation of regional projects to tackle any issues of collective actions or actually achieving the the more provision of regional public goods.
No, thanks a lot, Cyn-Young. Indeed, this issue of collective action has a lot to do with what Rachel, I think you mentioned, of how to projectize such actions. And so I want to turn to you, Lyaziza, on what are some practical ways do you think that in which we can make some of these collective actions bankable? Or maybe the value added of ADB is not just doing projects at this stage, but as Rachel mentioned, perhaps more broadly on learning. But do you think that there are practical ways in which we could take some of these cross-border issues and make them bankable for individual countries?
Absolutely. This is a very good question, Manny. Thank you. And thank you, Rachel and Cyn-Young also. Just one fact, I think, could answer maybe this question. Since inception of CAREC program in 2001 until up to now, overall CAREC program portfolio of investment project amounts to by now about $47 billion, of which, of course, which she showed now, 16 were funded by ADB and the rest by countries themselves and development partners. So that tells a lot about the investment power. But of course, the convening power that Rachel just mentioned, it's incredibly important. This is a platform, and remember, CAREC program, it's not a charter organization, right? We don't have, like, in other sub-regional programs, it's not a formal kind of treaty-based organization. So convening power, a platform where we bring people together, ministers, high level, but it's not only about high level. A lot of actually action is happening at the the working group sector level. We have energy group, we have trade, transport, health. Like we have 5 clusters covering 10 sectors. So a lot of technical work is happening at the technical level, at the bit lower level officials and mid-level officials. And then, of course, we have ministerial conference for which we are all gearing up now. On the 13th of November, we have ministerial conference in Tbilisi. It's a very high level. So how to really bring all of that talk, in some terminology, but really discussions, policy, trying to find what Rachel mentioned, trust, because, without trust, there are no regional activities, regional projects. I just also wanted to mention to you that unlike in GMS, for example, or some other sub-regional organizations, CAREC actually used to have many years back, Gulian is here in this audience, he was head of CAREC Secretariat for many years, so he knows that. We had a pipeline of regional projects, something that we discussed formally with countries. Then somehow we focused more on this convening power, on analytical support, honest brokerage function. But now we are trying under CAREC to revive this idea of regional pipelines. And just, I think, 2 weeks ago, I don't know if Alfredo and Bernard, my colleagues in CERD and SARD are here, maybe online, but 2 weeks ago we had just informal discussion, just 3 departments, 3 basically SASEC, GMS, and other regional, sub-regional arrangements in CERD and CAREC. We got together, we had this informal brainstorming among us, sharing experiences on pipelines of projects, specifically that. We wanted to learn that. So this is something really good. And I think your colleagues also, Yubin was part, I think Cyn-Young, you also joined this session. We learned from each other. So not only kind of, discussions, knowledge sharing, which is important by itself, but also concrete projects. Just give me 1 minute. Just one example. Kyrgyz Republic, we are working now on this regional health security investment project. This is RPG. This is, classical regional public good idea, and it's investment project. Also, under Almaty-Bishkek Economic Corridor, we have this cool initiative, really good. We are really supporting it on improvement of air quality, right? Air is not national. That is certainly regional public good. So how to improve the monitoring? So we give people, ability to really check on their iPhones, the air quality in Bishkek, the most polluted city in some winter months, and in Almaty. And also we are supporting actually civil society, right? Because with that, with think tanks, they have data. Now they can go to their government and really demand something. The air quality is horrible. So all these things we work on.
No, really, really interesting initiatives. And I actually want to get back to this issue that you raised about the importance of cross-departmental work here in ADB to get this done. And I'd like your reflections later on what this implies with the NOM. But I also want to warn the audience, please think up questions. I will be turning to you very soon. But Rachel, I want to turn back to you. And I know that Australia's been very active in other settings to really push regional issues. And I was wondering if you have any advice for the ADB on what might work to address some of these cross-border issues that, in fact, all of you have been raising, and whether there are lessons that you could draw on from your other experiences.
Gosh, so I think one of the, as we were chatting about in preparation for this panel, I think one of the things that I think does stand out about sort of the Central West is the absence of an ASEAN or a Pacific Forum kind of modality. So I guess in other parts of Asia and the Pacific, we have regional architecture that has sort of that exists and that often has a more formal structure than we have through CAREC. And I think, in other parts of the region, certainly in the Pacific, I think one of the things I would say that we could gain a lot from is really working through the regional architecture more strongly to sort of better leverage the convening power that those forums already have, and the priority setting process that members go through as part of that. It's one of the reasons why, and this won't surprise any of my colleagues, why I really do think growing our presence in Suva, where the Pacific Islands Forum is based, is really critical to better serving particularly the South Pacific. But then I think, and then you have things like ASEAN or APEC, particularly ASEAN, sort of where there are, I think, really important and very deeply held kind of norms and heuristics that are important to really achieving collective action. And so I think, again, just to go back to sort of the value of CAREC is I think that it is genuinely, I think, serving a purpose or filling a role that is otherwise not occupied. And I think, Lyaziza, to your point about it's the informality or the non-charter nature of it, I think is actually a strength in that it is providing sufficient flexibility to allow the mode of engagement, the breadth of engagement to really grow and change with changing needs. And so I think what you said about now starting to bring together the sort of long history of dialogue with knowledge sharing, with now also perhaps going back to a past modality around potentially regional programming. I think that's entirely appropriate sort of, and ultimately responsive to what it is members are actually looking to us from. And to me, that is to go back to your original question, Manny, I think that's, I think where multilateral action or regional action, if you like, kind of works most effectively is where all participants feel that they are being heard, that their perspectives are valued. Our Foreign Minister Penny Wong said it in her recent speech to the UN General Assembly that Australia's vision for the multilateral system is one in which no country dominates, but every country is recognised and heard. And I think at its best, that is what a lot of our regional engagement sort of does as well. And I think that's definitely true in the CAREC context.
No, thanks, Rachel. And I think, Lyaziza, you wanted to say something about this specifically. Then I'll also turn to you, Cyn-Young.
Yes, thank you, Manny. Just very quickly, I think, Rachel, what you mentioned here, the changing priorities, changing needs in countries, this is so timely and this is so true. I mean, this world is changing so fast these days. The last 2 years were, roller coaster in our region, Central Asia, South Caucasus, with everything. So the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, affected our region tremendously. And of course, I'm talking about from economic perspectives. So we do see that countries themselves, without ADB, without World Bank, IMF, CAREC Program, they're trying to intensify their own integration efforts among themselves. We have all these summits like Central Asia Summit, for example, which before it was inconceivable to see without participation of Russian Federation. Now, just 3 weeks ago, I think in Dushanbe, there was a Central Asian Summit. Only 5 Central Asian presidents were there. We also see this CA 5+1 that was in Xi'an with China, and then we had a separate meeting just recently also with presidents of Central Asian countries, with US president. So, this is a fast-changing world. Lots of geopolitical developments are happening. Of course, we are not a political institution. We very much focus on economic development of countries, but we, as economists, as people working in this region, we keep that everything on the back of our minds, and we are trying to see how we can change our CAREC program very actively and very quickly. So now we are looking at alternate transport and transit routes in the CAREC region, and how trade flows got reoriented because of all these changes. So
really interesting, the point both of you raised, how in this dynamic world, perhaps informal associations and support to those might be more important than having hidebound institutions, perhaps. Cyn-Young, I wonder if you could reflect on this point about what is the best way for ADB to support these organizations.
Well, I do really echo what you mentioned just now. In fact, maybe it's not the kind of like top-down approach, like building the institution first, and then somehow create a normative standards, and ask some of the members to comply or follow. That could have been model of maybe the EU and then the EC that studied with the institution building, but I think. In the history of Asia's institution, that has been always based on more of bottom-up approach, like a really market-driven. Even looking at the ASEAN formation, that really started with open market, open trade, and then investment. That that continue to build that momentum for that institution. What I also like to bring about here is somehow when there is a crisis, the common challenges facing the region, sub-region of multiple countries together, that's when the regional cooperation actually came out stronger, providing a greater, force to bring, more like a prosperity, better resilience, and then there's also continued development in the region. I think trade, in many ways, provide that like a strong platform for the region, whether it's CAREC or GMS or SASEC. The open trade and investment has been a major driving force for the region's growth and then development. And as we experience actually like, increasing geopolitical tensions and then also further kind of like a fragmentation between these different sort of like regional blocks and all, having that common, I guess market opportunities provided by trade actually opens that avenue for regional cooperation to come out even stronger. What like where the regional institution doesn't exist. In fact, the global the institution provides also the direction. It is actually how do the regional economies come together to seize that opportunity. Like a WTO's recent study suggested the trade barriers actually quite significant still in the region. And then if you look at the two major bottlenecks to trade has been the transportation and travel cost and the trade policy and the regulatory differences. What the region has to work even further together, this probably because of increasing fragmentation, is actually working on the trade policy and regulatory differences. What in many ways, I feel like when I heard Lyaziza saying majority of the CAREC economy is a landlocked, no one points to Switzerland as a landlocked economy.
Thanks very much, Cyn-Young.
Well, that's it's because it is connected. It's not necessarily only by the physical, but also by the the software connectivity.
Really important points. And we only have about 8 minutes left, so I'd like to make sure that we have some time to ask the audience for a couple of questions, observations. If they're specifically to one of the panelists, please say so, either online or here in Manila. So.
Well, it looks like your arguments were so well articulated and so convincing that people online don't have any questions. But if any, okay, Alex.
Please identify yourself and answer us, and then ask your question.
Alex Wellsteed, part of the IED team. I was particularly struck by the voices from the front line where two of the commentators mentioned water and the importance of that. I just wonder if any of the panel would like to comment about that and how that relates to economic integration and what role ADB can play in that space.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a couple of other questions given the time and see whether there are others. Please.
I'm Hideaki Wasaki, now the DDG for the Pacific, but I used to be involved in the CAREC program as the transport director. It's not really a question, but Lyaziza, you mentioned that we are trying to revive the regional pipeline. But I have a sense that probably ADB is getting into areas where it is not easy to provide finance. But through our relationships, which ED Rachel highlighted, we might be able to influence our member countries to take certain actions which have to be taken in a concerted manner. So I hope that we'll be patient in engaging with our counterparts and not really looking at data values this program will bring to us. This is just a comment.
Okay, thanks. Pick one more if there's anyone in the audience.
Hi, Andrew Brubaker, also from IED. Maybe just to be a bit provocative, because everybody was quite supportive of this bottom-up, kind of informal network kind of convening power as compared to the treaty format. Just wondering, because CAREC has been around since 2001, and some of the challenges, especially the water challenge, the trade, the fact that trade is so important, and yet we're not seeing movement on trade. At what point do we look and say, well, maybe it's time after 20 some years, the format of the CAREC and the Secretariat and what the intention is has to change to kind of up the game to respond differently. Is that something to consider? Thank you.
Thanks. There are a couple of questions and a reflection, but so we'll quickly go to each of the panelists and for any responses. So Rachel first, and Cyn-Young, and then Lyaziza.
Sure, thank you. I mean, perhaps Andrew, to come to your sort of question first, I think I think we'd need a clearer sense of the problem definition to decide that actually a formal treaty was the right answer to the problem. I'm not convinced that, you know, formality for the sake of it. I don't know. I feel like you could potentially end up investing a huge amount of time and energy, not necessarily. So as with everything that we do, being clear about the problem definition and making sure we are marshalling the best solution, I think should remain our sort of our North Star. And then I will leave the water question, I think, to colleagues who perhaps know the region more intimately than I do. But I think, Hideaki, I think you've really hit on what for me I think is one of the more sort of existential questions that the board continually grapples with, is sort of how do we balance making available resources to support dialogue and technical assistance and influence, things that bolster our influence, with activities that ultimately lead to lending that allows us to make money, that allows us to then reinvest in those activities. And I think it's a constant balancing act, would be my reflection on not just 10 months on this board, but, you know, a couple of years on a previous sort of MDB board. But I think you're quite right that, you know, that is both have value, and I think part of, I guess perhaps a final reflection as a, given that I've spent most of the first 6 months visiting all of my 11 members, is that I think certainly what a lot of my middle income country members value is the fact that we're not, unlike some other institutions, we're not quite so mercantilist in that we won't just tip in some TA if we think there's a deal at the end of it. We're prepared to actually kind of go along with them to help them figure out the problem definition. And that is actually part of what we are known for and part of what our members value about us.
Thanks, Rachel. Cyn-Young, 1 minute, and then 1 minute, please, and then Lyaziza.
Thank you. Well, in response to the questions about the bottom up, I don't really think staying at the bottom is necessarily good. I do believe that having that sort of a regional platform, work with the regional platform to make it as a building block rather than a stumbling block. I think we still need to go forward rather than and then having some sort of having implementable and then the step-by-step sort of the milestones through that regional platform that can be again part of that global sort of a multilateral umbrella. Thank you.
Thank you. Lyaziza, especially in the water issue. 1 minute.
Yes, yes, absolutely. This is a very important issue in Central Asia. We do already see actually even social tensions. We knew about them, we read about them as a potential, but now in reality this year we already see some frictions between countries, border closing and all that based on water issues. So this is incredibly important. So our colleagues now in sector divisions, we didn't get to talk to Nom, but our team who was part of CWRD before with Yasmin and her team on water resources, we have actually we have a separate cluster under CAREC together with agriculture and water resources and environment. So very, very important issue. And we indeed, not only us in ADB, but World Bank is also and other development colleagues and the CAREC program are looking very seriously on that. On regional pipeline, Hideaki-san, very important point, cautious about patience and all. Just one example, we have one potential regional project, I will not name it, in one of the Central Asian, 3 countries involved, actually I'll say Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, Hydra project. And company is already formed, and yet there is so much distrust, so much frictions, how to really structure it and so on. And that's exactly where we as owner kind of broker function or feature that we have, this is where we come and talk, and this is policy dialogue, awareness and all that, but we hope it will lead to investment opportunities. And finally, on the excellent question, provocative but really good, we can have another Insight Thursday on that for 1 hour, just focusing on that question. But I think I became a head of this unit. This is my second year, just relatively recent, so I'm really trying to direct my team to start implementing things. We have so many strategies under CAREC, very good strategies, very analytical, very good. Now it's a time for implementation. So whether it is at the summit level, at the technical level, at the working level, the most important that we really move on step by step, patiently, one thing by one thing. And finally, I think we are really getting into integration of this region.
Thank you so much. So like many other issues that we have to deal with, RCI is critical but challenging. So with that, please join me in thanking this great panel and Hao Chi for a very insightful conversation.